Hi, I'm Janine Firpo, and I want to thank you for joining us on this, our second Fireside Chat, leading up to the launch of my book, Activate Your Money, Invest to Grow Your Wealth and Build a Better World. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 2, and that chapter is called Your Relationship with Money. Invest with your heart and mind. And my guest today is Kate Barron-Alicante. She is a certified financial planner or a CFP. And what that means is that she's a highly qualified financial advisor. She's also the director of impact at Abacus Wealth Partners. So I'm going to let Kate tell you a little bit about her journey because I think it's fascinating to see how women have come into finance. Today, only about 23% of certified financial planners are women. And so we have a long way to go in bringing more women like Kate into this space. Once she tells her story and tells us a little bit about herself, then we will jump into the subject at hand, which is your relationship with money. And one last thing I want to point out is that Kate was instrumental in helping to write this chapter. So I really appreciate her contribution to the book, and I really appreciate her being here with me today. So Kate, welcome. I'm so glad to have you in our Fireside Chats.
Thanks, Janine. I'm excited to be here. We're by different fireplaces. Looks like yours is a little more alive than mine, but you have to have a fire in a fireside chat.
Well, I love that you did that as well. And I love the warm, homey look of your background. It's fantastic. You've got the fireplace, you've got the lights, the wood, all of that. And it looks like a snowy background in the background as well. So great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Kate, and how did you become a certified financial planner and work for Abacus?
Well, you're right. I had an unusual background to get here, and I'm so glad that I'm here because that unusual background serves me so well. If my college level self would have known that I'd be doing this now, she would not believe it for a second because I was anything with the word finance in it, I was just like, that equals bad, right? And just full of sort of righteous judgment about the world of finance. And it's probably not surprising that I went into the world of international development, similar to you, and worked in nonprofits and social justice nonprofits for about 15 years, in academia as well. So on the programming side of nonprofits, helping to actually implement the work of the nonprofit and be at the front line of the nonprofit's work and the communities that were impacted. So I did that work for many years. Kind of the biggest, most impactful experience of that was the number of years that I worked for a big humanitarian aid agency in South Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina, after Hurricane Katrina more specifically. But I would say that in hindsight, I can see so clearly how, and you probably have a similar perspective, but I can see so clearly how the world of nonprofit work and change making through nonprofits is so tied to resources and money. And so many of us working inside that space have our own relationship to money with which oftentimes hasn't been really fleshed out, either because maybe someone came from wealth and are operating inside the philanthropic nonprofit side, or they don't come from wealth, maybe they come more from the impacted community, and so they have a different experience with money and access to money. So that was my professional focus for so long. And it's funny that the book's subtitle is about growing your wealth and building a better impact, because really those are the two things that led me to becoming a financial planner. I basically, in my 30s, while I had my second child on the way and I was working and my partner was in school and working, a very, very, very busy life of young family professionals, I had this idea that I should work with people and money, which was the strangest idea. I was almost like, I think this idea is meant for someone else. I'm not sure how this is my idea, but it wouldn't let go. And it was because I knew that my own journey was one that could help so many women in particular, no matter what their wealth levels look like. But the fact that, for me, it was something that was very opaque and kind of like I don't even know what that world is, made it almost a bit of a dare. Like, what if I went and tried to learn more about money? It would benefit me, it would benefit my family, right? It would help us grow our wealth, but also I could share it as I went through that transition, I was able to get a sense of who were the different firms out there. And I hit the lottery, frankly, in being able to work with Abacus Wealth Partners. We uprooted and moved our family back to the East Coast for the opportunity to work for Abacus. And, Abacus was exciting to me because it was a rare firm on so many levels. So from the vantage point of the firm in the marketplace, or the firm for clients, but even for employees, right? So thinking about it from that vantage point. So for example, Abacus is a B Corp. And we were a founding B Corp.
So just to jump in, because I think some women may not know what a B Corp is. So what you're talking about, and what you're talking about in terms of Abacus, is that it's actually a company that built itself on the premise of doing positive things in terms of its business, its employees, and all the stakeholders. And it actually has to go through a certification process to achieve that goal. So your story is great, because I love the way you started out talking about the fact that you were concerned about finance. You thought it was kind of a bad thing. You didn't have any capability there. You were like so many women in that regard. And I think it's really important. But then you saw the power and the potential of money, and you jumped in to get what is, I understand, a 2-year process to become a CFP. So it is a very arduous undertaking. You jumped in to do that. You proved you could. You proved you had the knowledge and the ability. And then you found a financial institution to work for that is aligned with your values. So you are out there, not only, you're the core of what we're talking about with this book, right? It's really about, how do you prove to yourself, take control of your money, prove to yourself that you have this knowledge, learn how to be a smart investor, and then put those assets to work in alignment with your values. I think you could be like the poster child of the book. So I absolutely love that. But one of the things that I think is so important in what you were saying too, is that you see the importance of the story that you had about your money and the way you were thinking about money that kept you from being as successful in the finance space as you originally thought you could be. So I think it's also really apropos that you helped me write this particular chapter on money. And I would love if you could talk a little, we'll come back to Abacus in a minute, but I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what are our money stories? So we talk in this chapter about our money stories. What are they? And why do you think they're so important for women as they're starting on a financial journey, to know what a money story is and to know what their money story is?
Well, it's such a good question, because our money story is something that it's entirely ours, and it also transcends us. And our money story from this point forward can be very different from our money story this point backwards, right? So I think for many women, it's helpful to think about money from a narrative perspective, because it anchors our own experience inside the story. Oftentimes, the way we think about finance in kind of a more like traditionally masculine construct is like, it's outside of us, it's something else. There's some other experts that, tell us what to do. And I think for women, it's very empowering to think about money first and foremost as a story that we're living and that we have agency inside of. And maybe parts of the story could have been the legacy of your family, So for me, a big part of my story was, what is it to be white in America? And what is it to be the child of an immigrant as well in America? And so there's a societal lens to my money story. There's the, what I witnessed my parents, how they talked about money, where we lived, how that impacted, access. But then also, like, how did I learn to deal with allowance? Or what was my first job? Or how did I navigate paying for college? What were the discussions we had with that? What were the choices I made when it came time to choose a career? What was underneath that? How did money connect to that conversation? Or, in choosing partners, or in children conversations, right? All these choices, money is, it's in everything we do with, it can be with no judgment, right? But just understanding all the things that it touches. I found the process of knowing my own money story to be very grounding and very healing, but also really empowering. And I find that with women as well. I mean, when I end up working with women as a financial advisor and planner, where they're usually coming to me like for a technical thing, right? Like they think they're coming for something technical, but what they find very quickly and what they grow, like they love actually very quickly as well, is what is their personal connection to this, right? So one thing is, you can look at your money story and like through someone's current statements, like, okay, you have this thing, this account. What's the story with this thing? Where did it come from? Is it from an old employer, or did you inherit this? And, and just, you can treat everything as a story. I think it opens up our ability to interact with money.
Right. Well, one of the things that's really interesting to me about these stories is that a lot of times we don't understand that we even carry them. And we don't understand that we have biases or beliefs that we are carrying around money that actually really influence our behavior around money and the choices we're making, like you suggested, for better or for worse. And sometimes we're really limiting ourselves because of the stories we're telling ourselves. And I think the thing that's so important is they are just stories, and we can change the narrative. So if we have a story that is disempowering, and we get to understand what that story is, then we can change the story. And that's part of what we're trying to help women understand in this chapter. So one of the things that you helped me learn about in this process was something that one of the co-founders of your company, Abacus Wealth Partners, his name is Brent Kessel. One of the things that he developed, and he came up with this concept of 8 financial archetypes. And he's actually written a book that goes into a lot of detail on this called It's Not About the Money. I think that's the title, which I think is really brilliant. And there's also a quiz you can take online to determine your own financial archetypes. So could you speak a little bit about those? What are they? And maybe even give us an example of an archetype that you run into a lot of times with your clients.
Yeah, so the archetypes are fun. It's a fun way for people to actually tap into something kind of core to how they think about money, as you were saying. Oftentimes we think the way that we see money is the way money is seen by everybody, right? That it is just truth. And I think going through something like the archetype quiz helps you understand that it's not the truth. There's no one truth, but there is your truth in this moment in time. So the archetypes, they are, loosely based on kind of Jungian archetypes. And, there are 8 of them, as you said, and one that they all have something core, a core attribute of what they are, but also what makes them special, that particular archetype. What is the gift of that archetype? As well as kind of what's maybe the shadow. What is, what can be some obstacles to having that archetype? And we always say that archetypes are, there's no one is better than the other. They're not in hierarchical in any way, and that we are a blend of many, and some can be more prominent than others. And I found for myself that, and for some of my clients, that their archetypes slightly change as they change their relationship with money. So it's dynamic, right? But it's also very good starting point. So often when certain milestones in life drive people, and women in particular, to seek out a financial advisor. It could be the death of someone in their family creates an sudden wealth, or they're approaching retirement and they're not prepared, or a variety of kind of big life moments often are what drive people, not always, but sometimes. And so that sometimes that means that we're seeing people who are who are presenting a little more in one archetype, maybe more than others, right? So the one archetype that we see a lot is one called the guardian. And I know this one we've talked about before. So the guardian is sort of exactly what it sounds. It's someone who is really sort of vigilant about money and believes that they must be vigilant. There's, I think there's an acquainting it with, or relating it with responsibility, to be that alert about money, but it also has an underlying fear kind of like propelling it. And so it means that they're on the lookout or fearful of calamity, right? Financial calamity, and are doing everything they can, in a kind of a tense, a tight way, a little bit rooted in scarcity oftentimes, to kind of white knuckle and steal themselves from this potential calamity. That the numbers and the fear of the calamity don't often relate at all, right? So it's a story, it's a feeling. And I've found that with those clients, planning work is hugely beneficial to get them to slowly relax the grip a little bit and understand, because in financial planning, you can test scenarios, right? So there are things we could do, like, tell me all your scariest what ifs, and let's test. And you can see doing that process, how that helps this particular archetype of the guardian.
So there are a couple things there that I think are really important. And I think one of them is what you touched on last. And, one of the things I've learned is that a lot of women don't feel comfortable with their financial advisors. They feel talked down to by their financial advisors. They don't feel like they're listened to. And you just touched on talking to your clients about these things, about their fears, starting from there, not starting from, well, this is how we're going to set up your portfolio, and these are the things we're going to invest in, but really starting from a place of what matters to them, what they're afraid of, and how to help them overcome those issues. And I think that's something women really want, and I don't know that we get it as clients of many financial advisors. And in terms of what you said about the guardian, so I took that test and I am guardian up one side and down the other. I mean, I'm getting better, but I started out in life super poor. When I was a little kid, we didn't know where our meals were going to come from sometimes. We had a house over our head and clothes always, and we always got fed. But I know my mom was always afraid about money. She was a coupon clipper. And I grew up with that. I grew up with what I now know is called bag lady syndrome. And I actively believed that I was going to be 80 years old, living under a bridge, eating cat food because I had no money. And I saved my money like crazy. I invested it from an early age. I was at a point where I could retire and I still had bag lady syndrome. I didn't lose bag lady syndrome truly until I was in my late 50s. And finally started to sink into the reality of what you were saying, financial planners who helped me see, no, whatever's going to happen, you're going to be okay, right? And so I was finally able to let go of that. But I think I read somewhere that a significant number of women, particularly women who are older, middle-aged or older, have this syndrome of fear around losing their money or not having enough money at the end. So I think that's probably an archetype that would resonate with a lot of women. I'm curious if there are other archetypes that are completely different from that one. Or are they all are all the archetypes sort of fear-based and, oh my God, I'm not going to have enough money, or I have to be super vigilant? Are they all like that, or are there others that are very different?
No, they're all different. It's interesting because, with all of us, and we type ourselves this way, there's always a certain fear that might present in any of them. But I think the most kind of polar opposite to the guardian is the empire builder. And this is the woman who is maybe super accomplished in her field. Maybe an entrepreneur is a good example. So they're very accomplished, very successful, knows what they know really, really well. And it creates a bit of a blind spot for what they don't know. And it's funny because I've seen this in some women that I've, spoken with who work in the impact investing space, who know really, really well what they do in their lane of impact investing. And they don't understand that that's not the entirety of their money story. Right. And so I found it interesting with clients who are even empire builders inside the world of finance. Finance is a huge universe. I come to learn. I thought everything with finance was the same thing, right? It's very varied. But, there are part of being a financial planner is that we have a very holistic kind of 360-degree view of our clients' finances. And so someone who is an expert in emerging markets, equity, something, right? It's a very skinny lane, and that doesn't necessarily mean that their retirement is set up the way they think, right? That their process, it's one little slice, like I say, one little slice of the Trivial Pursuit pie. So, or clients who are engineers or who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are experts in what they do, that really actually also need a financial planner and advisor, because that's not their lane. And it's a profession. It's time to know, just like their career is something that took them time to be experts in. We can't do it all.
No, you're right. And it's really interesting that you say that and even talk about women who are in finance, because I've found that too. I mean, I've met women who were in banking or women who were in other parts of the finance field who really smart about it, doing great job, successful. And yet when it came to their own money, they didn't really understand it or know what they were doing or paying attention to it, right? Which you wouldn't expect. You wouldn't expect that kind of thing. And so I think that we see this aspect among many women where they don't want to pay attention to their money, or they don't have time to pay attention to their money, and yet it's really, really important. So that actually brings up a question for me. So when do you think it makes sense? How much money should a woman have, or at what point in somebody's wealth accumulation does it make sense for them to get a financial advisor? Are there any rules of thumb or thoughts that you have about when somebody should move to that?
I probably have an unconventional answer, because my answer is like, if you have a feeling that you want to know more and you want help, that's the time. Whatever your dollar amount is, because the reason is that there are different ways that you can access financial planning no matter where you are. And so it might be at different points in your journey, you access it in different ways. Otherwise, I think if you have, let's say like $250,000 in investable assets and up, you should be working with a financial advisor. $1 million and up, you should be working with a financial advisor. So it depends on, kind of who I'm talking to, but for anyone, it's like, if you feel like you want to know more and start chipping away at this, it's time, right?
I think that's a good point, wanting to know more. And I think that there's actually a chapter in the book, and we'll get to that later in the series, toward the end of the series, that talks about what a financial advisor can do for you, and how they work, and how to find one, and how to find one that's a values aligned one. But this point of, if you want to know more, I think is really interesting, because I've been up against that myself with financial advisors in the past. And really what I was looking for from my financial advisors in part was being educated. I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand. I didn't want to just be offered a solution that I should invest in this or I should invest in that without being told what it was or why that was happening. And I found that the female advisors I have do a better job actually educating me. And that's been a really valuable aspect of my own personal journey. I know we got a little bit away from the concept of why our money stories are important, but that's okay, because the chapter covers this in depth and provides a whole bunch more resources on our companion website about how to dig into this yourself, where to find Brent's book, how to take that financial quiz. But the other thing that we touch on in the chapter, and I'd love to just speak about that a little bit, is our values. So if we're going to be values aligned investors, then we need to understand what our values are. If we're going to invest our values, we need to know what those are. So could you talk a little bit about how you work with your clients to identify what their values are and to help them make decisions with their investments that are aligned with those values?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the traditional response, I think, of most advisors is, well, do you value your family? Do you value taking vacations? Like this sort of your personal level values, which are obviously an important part of the conversation. And I think what we get at in the chapter goes beyond that, right? And we're looking at what are your values, what is the legacy that you want to be a part of in society? And recognizing that we're in the era of climate change, where there's a lot going on. There's plenty of ways that you can use your money and leverage your money for greater impact. So those kind of conversations I have with clients when it comes to, let's see, so in many ways, basically, we go through a conversation, like a little bit of an education about what are the ways that you can that maybe your immediate assumption about how to make an impact might not be the most impactful thing. So I'm sure we get into this later on in the book, right? But where does divestment play a role? Where does being invested in something play a role, right? We're talking about in the public market, so we'll get to that. But with your money that's in a stock market, what are the ways you can actually make an impact? Like, there's a bit of an education there, right? And then within that, what do you really care about? And if you wanted to kind of tilt or kind of lean into one approach or another, what is really important to you? And so we go through that in a conversation with clients as well. And sometimes it's often like calibrating different things, basically, to help match, like, what were those personal goals? What do your assets look like? Where are we trying to get to? And then what can you do? And this is a very dynamic field. So the state of like impact investing or socially responsible investing in 2021 looks very different than it did in 2011, right? So knowing that we're inside a capitalist system, there's nothing perfect, there's no perfect company, right? But where do you want to be leaning into making an impact? We have those conversations with clients, and sometimes sometimes clients will ask us, well, what do you think? And I always really try to say, like, it's not about what I think, right? Like, this is your journey. This is your voice. This is you kind of owning and taking power with how your resources are used. And also there are ways that you can plug in with other people on this journey as well and find your way that way, right? So there's a way that it's an individual decision. There's a way that it's being plugged into kind of bigger conversations around you. And then there's a way that an advisor helps you like ground yourself in reality. Because sometimes I have clients who want to, they want to divest entirely from the stock market, or they want to go all in on like a very niche private investment thing. And I'm like, that's great. And that could be a great goal. Here are the reasons why I think that might not be the best starting place for you, and make sure we understand like what that means inside this other vision that like you're not a bag lady later on, right? And not from a place of scaring. I never have conversations with clients to scare them so that they act. I don't believe in that. But I do believe in like giving someone a fuller picture of here's how, tell me about why that's interesting to you. What is it about that particular, clean tech venture thing that you heard about from somebody that you want to do? Tell me more. And here's where there's kind of some downsides to that. Or maybe there's a way we could split the difference and really walk through what is the value that the client's trying to express and help them get there in a way that's best for them.
Well, what I love too is, so there's so much in what you just said but part of the thinking here truly is how you allocate your assets. And it's smart to put some into those kinds of private investments. And we talk about this in the book as well, but not everything, because then it puts more at risk. But what's really great is, and we show this in the book, is that regardless of the money that you're talking about, whether you're talking about your savings account, or whether you're talking about what you've got in the public stock market, or whether you're talking about bonds or private investments, whatever we're talking about, real estate, there is a way to think about that money in a values aligned way. And you can get really concrete, as we point out in the book, about what those values are. So for myself, for example, I've picked 5 values, and we explain how to do this. And they include, I want to support other women. And so I put my money to work supporting my other women. And some of that is in my choice of savings and checking account, where I have that. I want to support safe, sustainable cities, right? So there are certain things that I've chosen that other women can do too. And it helps really drive your decisions about what you invest in. And even more importantly, what you say no to.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can get overwhelming sometimes with the different choices. It's like, should I go right or should I go left? Well, if you have some guideposts about what your value priorities are, then that can help you make those decisions much more easily. So all of that came up for me when you were talking, which is wonderful. And we will go actually into some discussion about how to allocate your assets later in these conversations as well. So I love it. And I think it's really, the other thing you said that I think is really important is how you are a sounding board for your clients. And I really use my financial advisors that way too. I go less to them to tell me exactly what I should be doing and more to say, hey, I heard about this. What do you think? Can you check this out for me? Would this be a good decision or a bad decision? And so I really have a dialogue with them. And that has helped me feel much more confident about my money and much more confident about the choices that we're making. And it also really helps build trust with that advisor because I can hear their feedback to my thinking. And when I know that they're giving me good, solid feedback, it really helps me feel the level of trust that I want and need with somebody who's helping me around my money. Now, one of the things that you brought up when we were talking about the chapter, and I just want to touch on this a little bit before we close up, is you talked about something related to the current infrastructure of your money. And what you meant by that was the what, and the why. So what are you talking about when you mention current infrastructure, and what do you mean by the what and the where and the why?
I love this. I find this is like a really great place to start in addition to meeting clients where they're at with their values, right? It's like, okay, now we know where your values are. Now let's take a look at kind of like the state of affairs here, the state of the union. So it'll be like, let's take a look at all the statements that you have and let's talk about them, and with no judgment, just really honestly curiosity, like what is this? Where is it, right? And how did you come to be in this? Oftentimes, many of us don't, there might be a how about how I have this account, but like what's inside the account? Why is it invested in this way or that way? Like, it's okay. Oftentimes people don't know what's going on in there, and that's why we're here, right? But I think it's taking clients from being like disassociated from their money to being empowered, right? So I'm like disassociated, disempowered. I don't know what I have. I don't know where it is. I don't know what's inside of it. I don't even really know why it is that way. It's just, it is that way. Someone told me, right? And, I want my clients, to the degree of which they want to, I want them to understand everything about their money, right? And I think you're such a great example. Like I'm excited for this book because I think it will just help women continually take baby steps to get more clarity. It's not something that you did overnight or in the course of a time it would take one to read a book, right? It's a journey, but it's possible. And the first step is just sort of like a bit of a diagnostics, right? Sort of like, what's the state of affairs? What is so I call it your infrastructure, is there are things that you have, and let's take a look.
Right. Well, and I think that that's really what we've talked about in this time together, is we've talked about those first steps of what you need to think about when you start down the journey of really taking control of your money. And the first step is, how do you think about your money right now? What are those stories that you're telling yourselves that are either empowering you or disempowering you? How do you get clarity around them? And then how do you get around them so that you can be as confident as you need to be? And then if you're going to be a values aligned investor, how do you determine what those values are? What is it that you want to support? And then ultimately, the next step is really starting to look at, well, what do you have now? What do you have? Where is it invested? How is it invested? Why is it invested the way it's invested? So those are really the first steps. And one of the things that I've found in terms of the issue with women being disempowered around their money is once they start to realize the power of investing their money in the things they care about and beginning to know that their money is actually doing great things in the world, that disassociation stops, because you start to get these really cool reports that tell you your money just helped these women accomplish this, or your money just was instrumental in stopping something else from happening, or you're not supporting certain things that you don't want to be supporting. So it's really empowering. I find values aligned investing is a really strong empowerment tool to get women to care about their money, because we start to feel good about what it's doing and we start to feel in integrity. I mean, so many of us spend our lives thinking about, are we feeding the right thing to our kids? Are we doing the right things for our family? Are we helping? Are we doing enough? And when our money is working against those things, we don't feel in integrity with our money. And the way that we started this whole conversation was your own story about how disassociated you felt from your money. And I think values aligned investing can really change that dynamic, bring us into integrity with our money, and make it a powerful resource for us. And not only make it a powerful resource for us, but powerful for the world. And as more of us do that, I really do think we can have an extraordinary impact. Extraordinary. So before we end, I want to ask if there's anything else you would like to add, or if there's one thing that you would love our listeners to take away from our conversation today, what might that be?
I think there's an exercise in the chapter that I think is really great that anyone can kind of get started on if this conversation inspires you, which is to sit quietly and, journal or write or type up, whatever works for you, some values that you think are top of mind. I love how you selected 5 to focus on, but even if you start with a longer list and you pare it down, I think it's a really good place to get grounded in what do I care about with my contribution to the world. And from that anchored place, moving forward into the more technical conversations makes more sense.
Right. I love that you just said that, because journaling and money, whoever thought that one could journal around their money, right? That's not the way we're supposed to think about our money. But the whole point of these conversations in the book is we don't have to think about our money the way the men set up the structure. We can think about our money in whatever way we want. We do things differently. And I'm just so happy that there are amazing women like you out there to help other women on this journey. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate it. I think I want to let you add something.
I was just going to add, generally speaking, I know that's it's a generality, but I think it's true in many cases with women that we are relational. And if you think about money as something you're in relationship with, right? Money is something you're in a relationship with. It's what is that really? What do you want that relationship to be? And how do you want it to be an expression of your contribution here?
That's great. And we're going to show in the book too, how you can be in relationship with your money with other women, because since this is a journey, you can take it alone, you can take it with a financial advisor, or you can take it with your girlfriends and your family members. And we'll explain all of that as we go forward. So with that, we'll end today. And I invite everyone to come back to our next session, which we will have a week from today. And in that, we're going to be talking about some of the core issues that you need to consider when you start to look at setting up your portfolio. So we're going to talk about some of the minimum requirements for being an investor, and then some of the most important steps in figuring out exactly what Kate was talking about, the how, the where, and the why. Looking at what you have now, we'll talk about some tools you can use to figure that out, and to start thinking about something called asset allocation, which we'll get into a lot more next week. So please join us again. And just as a reminder, my guest today was Kate Barron-Alicante. She is a CFP and she is with Abacus Wealth Partners. So if you want to look her up, you can Google that and you will find her. Thank you so much again. And thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Janine.